I am going to say right off the bat, if you are eating right now, you might want to put your food down because these stories you're about to hear are quite something. That's a little disclaimer for you. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell for more content and follow my Instagram for updates. I had a neighbor who was a CO of a juvenile prison in my city. There was a new kid at the prison one day. He was apparently very shy and very quiet. He had the misfortune of sharing a cell with one of the more violent inmates. His second night there, his cellmate unscrewed a screw from a bench and sat on his bed in the middle of the night. When he woke up, he said, "I'll make you a pirate," and shoved the screw into the new kid's eye. My neighbor was the first CO to respond to the kid's calls for help. When asked why he shoved a screw in the new kid's eye, he claimed that he looked at him the wrong way. That's a pretty messed up situation if you ask me, and not one I'd like to deal with under any circumstances. I worked at a level 5 prison with level 3 mental health. We had a guy in a mental health building and all other inmates swore he was an informant for the warden, so the other guys proceeded to beat this guy with a broken broomstick. They beat his face so bad that they crushed most of his bone structure into his face and left eye popped out. Now, this may not sound so bad at first, but what ended up messing with me was when I transported this guy to the hospital. Every time this guy breathed, his whole damn face was moving in and out because it was crushed so severely. I go by the cell and notice this foul smell. I pull the inmate out and lock him in another spot. I go into his cell and his sink has got this rotten, disgusting liquid inside of it, filled all the way up with his ass toy of a spoon next to his sink. His entire cell smelled horrible. Later on, come to find out, all his food he was served to him. Since he's in sec, his trays are brought to him. He dumped in his sink, filled it up with water and let it ferment. That's what he ate, rotten soup, and used the spoon he shoved up his ass for masturbation to eat with. And the ingredients were rotten, disgusting old food. I used to work as a prison guard on Rikers Island, and I remember one experience that really sent a shiver down my spine, still does actually. This was when I was a bit new there. I had sort of an idea it would be hard, but I didn't really know how hard. I was passing out pieces of chicken to the inmates. I handed a piece to this tall, skinny guy, and he still had his hand out. "Give me another one." I figured he was trying to test my limits since I was the newest guard, so of course I told him no because I didn't think I should send the message I could be pushed around. So I told him no. He got kind of mad, but for the time being, he cooperated. A couple days later, that same guy motioned for me to come over. "Hey, don't you live on my exact address? And your wife's name is my wife's name." I was stunned for a second there. I still have no idea how he found that out. Also, there was this time during a prison fight I saw a dude casually spit out a makeshift knife, catch in midair, and give the nearest inmate a telephone cut. I worked county corrections for a decade and I've seen some truly disturbing shit. A few that stuck with me are: had a mentally ill man get arrested and brought into our facility. He was saying some pretty off-the-wall things, so the sergeant had to strip him down to his birthday suit and place him in a padded cell so he couldn't harm himself. Fast forward a couple hours and this guy's mental state, combined with the drugs he used, was rapidly deteriorating and becoming incredibly violent. This guy suddenly believes he has diamonds embedded in his colon. He believes if he can get them out, he can bribe us with the diamonds and we will set him free. Slowly but surely, this guy starts shoving his hands up his ass. We are well into night shift and don't have the staff to do an extraction, so we call for backup from street deputies. Backup is 30 minutes out. This guy manages to get his entire fist into his ass halfway up the This guy manages to get his entire fist into his ass halfway up to the forearm. He then rips his hand out really fast. Following his hand was a torrent of blood and shit. He immediately shoves his hand right back up and pulls out again, increasing the amount of blood and shit spraying out of his ass. He repeatedly does this while backup arrives and gets suited into PPE. Extraction plans are laid out for a forcible removal to the hospital. EMS units are on standby. While everyone is stacking up on the door, this guy goes for the gold. He goes deeper and with a final Hail Mary, pulls out all it's worth. Out comes his hand with a large piece of flesh in it, following that was a large pile of his innards. With a gut pile laying on the floor and intestines running from the pile back into his ass, we enter the cell. The guy starts fighting us. We manage to pin him to the floor and restrain him. Every one of us is covered in this guy's feces and blood. His ass is still bleeding like a spigot. EMS staff comes in and puts his guts in a bucket. Dr. Head came in and forced him under with a sedative. EMS put him on a gurney, put the bucket of guts on top of his stomach and hauled him off to the hospital. Guy ended up surviving with a one-way ticket to the state hospital, mental ward. Also watched a guy kill and eat his cellmate once as well. I have others, but this is probably the topper. Started working corrections in 2001, here are some stories. First night on duty, had an inmate find out another was a convicted child rapist. Put a canned ham in a sock, packed it full of ice, and proceeded to beat the man's eye out of its socket. So there I am, out of training, holding a man's eye in his head waiting for the nurses to show up. Also had an inmate segregated because he was 10 to 96, crazy, liked to chew his own shit, place it on an empty toothpaste tube and stomp on it while you walked past doing rounds. Had an inmate transferred in from another state. When he got off the transportation bus, he was sweating very hard. It was winter, so it was odd. We dry celled him for about 20 minutes. We hear this dull thunk in the bucket and he came to the door looking relieved and said, "I'm done." Removed the inmate and the bucket from the cell. Inside was a capped metal pipe about 7 to 8 inches long. It contained 3 saw blades, a cuff key, and razor blades, and a shank. The facility I worked at had a riot. Burnt the administrative building, canteen, kitchen, meal room, record room, and laundry. Took us 8 to 9 hours to regain control of the facility. I was slapped with institutional need and spent 2 weeks locked in a pod, sleeping in a bunk, showering in day room, and eating bag lunches. I left after the riot. Had some PTSD issues, but it's all gone full circle. I now am deputy sheriff. I must admit this was one of my old university campus security guards when I was in halls, not me personally. She told me that she used to work in a British prison and there was a new young guy who had just started working there. Basically, he pissed off one of the huge, muscular prisoners and the prisoner held a grudge, so at one point the guard was on his own and the prisoner pushed him over. When he was on the floor, the prisoner basically stamped on his head a few times before he could be restrained. The woman I knew was one of the first guards there to deal with it all, and she said there was blood and brain matter all over the floor and the guy was still alive with his head half open and smashed to pieces. The young security guard actually lived, but he was a vegetable after that. In general population area called MB, main building, there is a transient wing called D1. It's for inmates that are temporarily assigned to the unit for various reasons, but usually for medical. This unit also has a regional medical facility. In one of the cells is an inmate that had some psychological issues. We, the guards, never paid much attention to him, but he always talked to himself. It was basically gibberish and didn't make much sense. One night I was working in a different area, but I got a call on the radio. Flash, 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 offender is needed of emergency medical care. That was the initiation of ICS and usually meant there was a problem, usually a fight or severe injury. Turns out this was a murder, and I swear this is something out of True Detective. There was an inmate face down in his bunk tied up with bedsheets dead with blood everywhere. The dead inmate was shirtless and had runes carved into his back. The other inmate was curled into a ball muttering demons, demons. It turns out the dead inmate wasn't dead but really close to it. He was sent out on a 911 call and later died at the hospital. As for the murderer, no one could get a motive. One of the neighboring cellmates said he heard everything and described old screams and the inmate saying, "The demons are coming." The worst thing I have ever encountered was the incident that still haunts me today. Before I start, I'd like to just quickly give you a rundown on our count procedures. We run our evening meal around 4:10 p.m. every day. After the offenders leave the mess hall, they are escorted back to their housing unit followed by a facility master count. One part of my specific job duty in my facility is to run the evening meal in our second mess hall. After the meal had ended, I was counting the plasticware when all of a sudden my radio chirps to life. It was my area sergeant calling for me, but I could immediately tell by his tone that something was wrong. I quickly lock up my plasticware and call him on the phone. In a surprisingly frantic voice, he asks me if I had seen a specific offender during the evening meal. This offender used to work with me in my area, so I knew him well. He always ate chow, and I realized that I did not, in fact, see him today. My sergeant informs me that he is missing. I tell him that he works in our industry building, and so my sergeant tells me to grab my roundsman keys and search that area. I run down the hallways to the front of the facility where our equipment is kept. I grab my 2 massive key rings and dash down the hallway a second time towards the yard. On my way outside, I pass another officer and he asks me what's going on. I simply just look at him and tell him we're missing one. My fellow officer joins me and we head over to the industry building. As I unlock the front door to the dark industrial-type building, we are hit with the strongest smell of copper/metal and immediately recognize the familiar scent of blood. 2 other officers now arrive on the scene. As we all round the corner, the floor is completely covered in a flowing river of blood. We aim our flashlights and see a body laying one of the through sinks. He is shirtless and motionless. The only sound is the clanging of old heating pipes and the running hot water overflowing from the sink the offender is laying in. We call over the radio for medical and request an ambulance when all of a sudden the man we presumed dead sits up from his bloody bath and raises his left arm. We can see that he had cut his wrist to the bone. He looks at us and says, "You guys are about to see some weird shit." That is when we see his right hand is physically in his stomach and he starts pulling out his intestines. Horrified, we all stood in silence. Seconds felt like an eternity, and as we stood there in a lake of blood, watching a man pull his guts from himself. We calmly tell him to stop, that help is on the way, and we ask him who did this. He simply responds, "I did this to myself. I have to get the orb out of me." One of the officers with us finally manages to find the breaker for the lights, and then when the whole picture of carnage can be seen. Blood everywhere, handprints, smears, overflowing blood, water covering the majority of the floor, we also notice he has stabbed himself in the neck. We managed to get him to stop removing the rest of his intestines, move the clogged drain, and take out the scrap metal he used to hurt himself. We wrap him in blankets so that his intestines don't fall out on the floor when we transfer him to a gurney. The ambulance arrives and we can hear the helicopter zoom overhead to the landing pad across the street. Because of our quick action, we managed to save his life, but that kind of trauma will be with me for the rest of my career. It's something I don't ever wish to see again. So I was standing on the yard one day, monitoring the movement when someone called a fight in building 1. So being a yard officer, I run to respond. As I entered the building, I saw the floor officer, newly certified, and a counselor yelling at 2 inmates, one white, one very dark-skinned, to break it up, but nobody's putting hands on yet. I get through the bar gate just in time to see one inmate grab a pool ball and crack the other guy in the face with it. Needless to say, he went down. I got between them, grabbed the white guy, who at this point stopped fighting, and cuffed him up and took him to what we call the smoke cage, where they used to be allowed to smoke. As the dark-skinned guy was walking by, I could see his shirt had come off, and on his chest and face huge hot pink spots, like dinner plate sized, covered his chest, and ragged bit of skin was hanging off around them. Apparently the other guy had spent about 20 minutes boiling cleaning chemicals and Vaseline in his bowl and proceeded to dump it on the black guy while he was sleeping. I will never forget how bright those spots were, particularly on his dark skin. I'm talking like the color of a pink highlighter, and skin just peeling off of his face and chest as they carried him out. I have seen guys get cut up, heads bashed in, all that fun stuff, but for some reason, that one sticks in my head. When I found these stories, I couldn't believe what I was reading. Some of these are absolutely ridiculous and sounded like something truly out of a horror film. It goes to show that there can be some seriously disturbed and broken people out there in those places. Comment down below your thoughts on these stories. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new, hit the bell for more content, and follow my socials. Leave a thumbs up for part 2 if interested, because I got way more of this in store for you. That is it. I'll see you in my next video.